The federal and New South Wales governments will this morning reveal a package of increased financial support for people and businesses badly affected by Sydney's lockdown. With the shutdown in Australia's largest city and surrounding areas now tipped to continue for several more weeks, businesses will gain access to a cash flow boost to help keep them afloat. The COVID-19 disaster payment for individuals will also be increased.
The move comes as epidemiologists and authorities have expressed alarm at the growing number of people positive with the Delta strain moving around in the community, particularly in Sydney's southwestern suburbs. Let's get more from our reporters. Lara Hyams is in Sydney and Jane Norman is at Parliament House in Canberra. Good morning to both of you. Lara, what's happening in Sydney?
Good morning, Lisa. Well, the numbers tell the story of just how much trouble we're in. 112 cases recorded yesterday. Of that, 64 are linked to known cases. There are 48 which remain under investigation. Now, 3/4 of those cases are actually in the southwest corridor of Sydney. So this is those three local government areas of Fairfield, Canterbury, Bankstown and also Liverpool. We know that there are 41 cases which are household contacts. This apartment block actually in Bondi Junction is among those figures too. There are 8 cases of COVID recorded across 5 households. Now that was enough for the police to be sent in and shut this building down yesterday. They've been here overnight to make sure no one goes in or out. So really a lockdown within a lockdown. The other area of concern for the government is that there are 34 cases which were in the community throughout their entire infectious period. So that's something that the government wants to get down to as close to zero as possible. We've also had an increase in hospitalisations, more than 60, 18 of those in intensive care. 4 people are sadly on ventilators. We know with our testing rates, more than 45,000, but the government wants that figure to increase. They're saying obviously anyone with symptoms go and get tested, but even if you have tested negative previously and those symptoms return, go back and get tested. We know that with our vaccination rates, we're sitting at about 11,500 or so, but the government are hoping that that figure increases too.
And has the Premier got some new advice on how to get vaccination?
Well, she certainly increased the vaccine rollout. They're making sure that teachers and aged care workers that are in that particular catchment area, those 3 local government areas deemed as hotspots, that they get prioritised for vaccination rates. Also, they've enlisted the help of pharmacists. There had been some conversations with the Pharmacy Guild of Australia to help with the vaccination rollout. And we've also been informed in the last 24 hours as part of the announcement for the government that AstraZeneca vaccine will now be available, administered by New South Wales Health, if you're aged over 40. The Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, says that's good news.
From now, we'll be able to accept anybody over 40 who wants the AstraZeneca. As you know, the federal health advice or the regulatory advice is that over 60s can get AstraZeneca without any of those risk profiles that were identified. But if you're between 40 and 60 and want to get the AstraZeneca, you can go through the appropriate consent forms at all New South Wales health sites, which is very positive.
Now, if you're aged between 18 and 39, the advice is go and speak to your GP about that. The advice that we've heard from New South Wales is still a little bit out of step with ATAGI. That's the advisory body providing guidelines on the vaccine rollout from a federal perspective, but that advice may change in the coming days.
All right, thanks, Lara. And Jane, with the thought that this lockdown is going to continue for some weeks possibly, lots of discussion about what financial support might be on the way.
Yeah, there's clearly a view within both governments, Commonwealth and the state government, that this is a severe crisis emerging in Sydney and that this lockdown at this stage has no end in sight. So today we're expecting the details of a jointly funded financial support package. It'll contain 2 elements, a likely boost to the COVID disaster payment that was only introduced about 6 weeks ago during Melbourne's 2-week lockdown. It's worth about up to $500 a week for workers affected affected by the lockdowns. Today we're expecting that to be increased, could be up to about $600 a week, as well as an expansion of the eligibility to ensure more workers can get access to that cash. The second element of the package is support for the businesses who are being crippled by this lockdown. Now, this support could come via a tax credit or by direct payment. The details are a bit sketchy at this stage, but there'll be a big caveat. Those businesses who are receiving this support must retain their workers. It's about keeping jobs during this crisis. And Lisa, it was only last week that National Cabinet made a decision that during lockdowns such as these, the Commonwealth would take care of income support for workers, the states would take care of assistance for businesses. We're already seeing a departure from that. This is a jointly funded package, we understand today, which, as I mentioned, really underscores the deep concerns about this extended lockdown in Sydney.
As they try to reassure some very worried people. Thank you, Lara and Jane. We're also keeping an eye on what's happening in Victoria because authorities have added 3 Melbourne locations to a list of exposure sites overnight after it was revealed 4 cases linked to the New South Wales outbreak were in the community while infectious. The new locations are linked to members of a family who've been under a self-isolation direction since returning on red zone permits, and to removalists who tested positive after coming into Victoria for work. The locations include an apartment complex, a supermarket and a service station in Melbourne's north and northwest.
Tougher measures have come into place for South Australians returning from New South Wales overnight. Residents who've been in the Greater Sydney area will now need to apply for an exemption and prove they can quarantine alone at home. Premier Stephen Marshall says those trying to return home from regional New South Wales and the ACT still need to make an online application but won't face the same level of scrutiny. Meanwhile, Queensland's border to New South Wales is still open, but the Queensland government says this could change at any time. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has confirmed COVID restrictions will lift in England next week. Mr Johnson says by Monday, 2/3 of adults will have received 2 doses of a COVID vaccine, and he wants the reopening to take place during the warmer summer months.
It's absolutely vital that we proceed now with caution. And I cannot say this powerfully or emphatically enough. This pandemic is not over.
Gyms in South Korea's capital Seoul and its surrounding region have been banned from playing music with a tempo higher than 120 beats per minute in a bid to limit the spread of COVID. I kid you not. Treadmills will also be limited to a maximum of 6 kilometres an hour. That's okay with me. BTS fans will still be able to work out to most of the K-pop group's hits, but for example, this one black song will be banned. That is more than 120 beats per minute, so that is banned, banned, banned. We have got all your workout news here this morning, Mads.
That is so... As this virus continues, we are getting more and more creative in the ways that we're attempting
creative
to spread.
is one word to put it. OK, let's get more on those possible COVID exposure sites in Melbourne after a family with infectious members returned from a trip to New South Wales, and then 2 removalists also who later tested positive spent time in Victoria. Reporter Steph Ferrier joins us now from Melbourne. Good morning, Steph. So where had the removalist crews been working?
Good morning, Lisa. Yes, so this 3-man removalist team, 2 of whom have now tested positive after returning back to New South Wales, worked here at the Ariel Apartments at Maribyrnong in Melbourne's northwestern suburbs. They were actually here to pick up furniture for 4 to 5 hours on Thursday, July the 8th, and that was just after they'd dropped off furniture in another home in Craigieburn in Melbourne's north. Now, that family is all isolated isolating. Luckily, they didn't go out and see too many people, and this family here is also isolating. But unfortunately for all the residents who are here in this apartment complex, they've been told that anybody who was here from 1 until midnight on Thursday, July the 8th, will also have to isolate and go into lockdown for 14 days and also get tested. Now, after that, people who have come along on subsequent days will also have to isolate until they receive a negative test result. There are also other exposure sites that are also linked to a family of 4 that returned back to the city of Hume in Melbourne's north after travelling to the red zone in New South Wales. They include a service station and a McDonald's at Ballan, and also the Coles Craigieburn supermarket, which is in Melbourne's north. So another supermarket of concern. Now, those 2 positive cases of that family of 4 will be counted in today's numbers. So unfortunately, our 12 straight days of 0 new local cases will come to an end. The question is whether or not the other 2 family members who are still awaiting their test results also test positive, and also whether or not this is spread any further from these removalists as well. So the health department is really saying that they're concerned about the fact that maybe these removalists weren't quite as tight and robust with their answers as to exactly where they went as they could have been, and so they're now scrambling to get that information, and they're asking anybody who particularly lives in the Melbourne's northern and western suburbs to really check those exposure sites just to see if any further ones come up.
Yeah, no doubt we'll get more information as the day goes on. Steph, thank you. OK, let's go to Queensland now, because 4 men have been fined for travelling from Sydney to watch the rugby game last week. For more details, we're joined from Brisbane by our reporter Michael Rennie. Michael, what's going on here?
Lisa, so these 4 men arrived from Sydney on board a 34-metre super yacht that docked at Southport on Wednesday last week. They then immediately went off to up the M1, up the freeway, headed to Brisbane to watch a rugby match, to watch the Wallabies take on France on Wednesday last week. The issue here, Lisa, is that they've arrived from Sydney and they've lied on their border declaration passes. And authorities, Water Police and other authorities, look, they've cottoned on to this and they've tracked the men down days later. They've then fined each of these men $4,000 each, and they've been placed in hotel quarantine. This would have authorities fuming because we already know Queensland is flirting with the idea of closing the border to New South Wales already with what's happening there, and that's really going to affect those people that live in those border towns if that does eventuate that the border is closed. We've also got restrictions set to ease in Queensland on Friday, in parts of Queensland on Friday. So that's the wearing of the masks outdoors and other restrictions for businesses. So it's a good time at the moment because businesses are going to be able to have more people coming through the doors when those restrictions are eased, and people are going to be able to have more people at weddings and other events as well. So we had a lockdown here during the school holidays. It's not that long ago, and I think this sort of behaviour, this sort of entitled behaviour, would certainly be really infuriating authorities, Lisa.
Yeah, I bet. It comes on the day that we're looking at more Pfizer vaccines arriving from the Commonwealth. What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right, Lisa. So where I am this morning is actually the largest Pfizer vaccine hub in Brisbane. They can churn through a lot of people here. It's located at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, but stocks have been desperately low. In fact, they've only been able to administer second doses. They haven't been able to offer first doses to the Pfizer vaccine over recent times. But that could all change today, with 65,000 doses expected to arrive from the federal government. They're expecting another 62,000 doses on Thursday, so that could see things ramp up at least for a little while, Lisa.
Michael Rennie, thank you very much.
OK, tougher restrictions have come into place for South Australians returning from Greater Sydney. Authorities are also trying to track the movement of 2 removalists who were infectious while travelling through the state. Charles Bryce joins us now from Adelaide. Charles, good morning. So what exactly is the change border advice for SA?
Morning, Michael. Well, as the COVID situation in New South Wales continues to go from bad to worse, the state government here is making it quite tougher for people in New South Wales to return home to South Australia. They'll no longer be able to just tick a box on a form online. They'll now have to prove to SA Health that they'll be able to quarantine at home by themselves. There's also stricter measures coming in for those transport workers who are entering into SA. They'll now need to get a COVID test at the border. They'll be able to continue working, but they must isolate at all other times. That new rule has been brought in because of those removalists who have travelled from New South Wales into Victoria and as well as South Australia. They were infectious at the time of their travels. They were helping a family of 4 move into a McLaren Vale home. They did that on Friday, and despite their troubles, there are no known exposure sites at the moment, and that family of 4 is in self-isolation. But Premier Stephen Marshall has outlined why these stricter measures are so important.
We know around about 950 South Australians came back into South Australia from New South Wales. We want to seriously turn that tap off. Exemptions will be provided, but on a much narrower basis where people can very clearly identify that they will be able to quarantine separate from anybody else at home.
So that's South Australia Premier Stephen Marshall. Charles, also, what more do we know about this latest death that has been linked to the AstraZeneca vaccine?
Yeah, well, Michael, it's really sad. The 72-year-old woman from regional South Australia, she received her AstraZeneca vaccine on June 24. She started developing blood clotting symptoms and she was admitted to hospital on July 5. She sadly passed away just a couple of nights ago. Her death has been reported to the Therapeutic Goods Administration. As we know, these deaths from blood clotting in relation to the AstraZeneca vaccine are so rare, but that doesn't make it any more easier for her family.
Going through a tough time at the moment, undoubtedly. Charles, thank you.